Hi, everybody. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Billy Mitchell, Editor-in-Chief of FedScoop, and now joining me is Jane Datta, NASA Chief Human Capital Officer, for a chat on our new normal, engaging the remote workforce. Jane, thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Jane, let's start. It's the end of November 2020, more than 9 months into this pandemic at this point. How has NASA adjusted to this new world of mostly virtual work? And if you can, in what ways was NASA at all prepared for this shift in work?
Great question. So let me start with the first part, which is have we adjusted? And I would say yes, we've adjusted very well to this. However, it did take us a little bit of time to get there. So at the outset, before we knew that this was going to turn into a pandemic, we had a lot of good experience with teleworking. People had telework agreements, people intermittently teleworked across the agency. It's something that we had adopted as a workforce strategy some years back. We also had a lot of experience with virtual tools. We had adopted those at least 9 or 10 years ago. So we had quite a bit of experience, especially connecting people from one site to another. So this was virtual connection when you were in your office with people in offices in other locations. So it was easy to take that experience and use it when you were just connecting everybody up from their home locations. However, the difference was that we were going to scale really rapidly. So if you think about people teleworking or using virtual tools for some small percentage of their time to a rapid change where everybody sort of went home in a week's period of time, so that 90% of our workforce was working from their home or some other non-office location. That's an enormous leap. Moreover, I'd say, people who are used to like teleworking and maybe connecting through virtual tools for a few meetings in a single day in a week, were doing it full time with all the distractions of their home environments that made it hard to do all the balancing. So, for that reason, that just the sudden jump in the number of people and the amount of time, I think it did take us a couple of months to kind of settle in, but I would say that we have made enormous strides in being efficient and productive over the last 5 or 6 months. So,
And it sounds like you were decently prepared, though, because you had made those strides before that, moving to
yes.
tools, and some people had teleworking agreements in place. So, it sounds like you were prepared. And then I would love to follow up by hearing, where things stand. Obviously, this thing isn't a linear curve; things are up and down. What's the workforce? The proportion of the workforce that's working remotely at this point?
So essentially, anyone who can perform all of their work without being on site is asked to remain in the telework status. So we're probably at about 75%. Is still teleworking, maybe a little bit less, but it's still more a good deal more than 50%. So I sit in what we call a mission support function, which is HR and other folks in finance and procurement. And there are really there's almost nothing that we can't do remotely, and so we do. Where we have people working on site is when they have manufacturing or integration or test or things that require them to be in a specific facility. So we've been really careful not to bring people back on site too rapidly and be driven by the kind of mission critical nature of being on site. So that has left most of us still working remotely for all the time that we work. So it's and I don't know how long that will last. None of us do. The winter is going to bring us an answer, and then we're going to get into the spring of next year, and that might give us a different one. So can't not got a crystal ball, but we're in it for some longer period of time for sure.
Sure, sure. I could imagine. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I will ask you to sort of play that role for at least a brief second. And, the question everybody has on their mind at this point is, now that this has occurred, and it seems to, for large proportions of the federal government, it's worked. People can work remotely. This is proven. It kind of brings the question, what's the future of federal work look like in the long run in a post-COVID world? We don't know when COVID's going to end, but we know that telework is an option when it does. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, at least from a NASA perspective, is there a future for a more telework enabled federal workforce at your agency?
I would say the short answer is yes. And I think that the open question is the degree to which we move to a more remote or telework environment. So I think we've actually learned a lot in a very condensed period of time about the advantages and in some cases the disadvantages of telework. And so I think what we've proven, though, on balance, is that there are many advantages that we get with a where geography is not as important, and I think we're starting to find ways to adapt to the deficiencies of telework, i.e., you're not actually seeing people face to face, building a sense of community, developing relationships, all the things that an on-site workforce can do more readily than a virtual workforce. We're starting to find ways to make that or to shore up those kinds of advantages of on-site when you're not on-site. So the question is, how far do we get with making off-site work feel as much of a positive from an engagement and community and relationship building as being on-site? So I think that the question lingers about, yes, we're going to actually enable more telework than before. We have supervisors maybe who were very skeptical about telework and weren't all that for it, and maybe they've suddenly realized that, hey, this isn't so bad. There's a lot of work that can get done, and I didn't think so before. At the same time, I think there is this essential need that people have to see each other and interact with each other. And so I don't know whether in the near future we're going to move very much more to mostly offsite, or if it's still going to be mostly onsite with a more liberal telework posture. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that social interaction and the importance of that, because that's the root of engagement for a lot of federal employees, being in office and actually seeing their mission and work. So I'd love to ask, we're focused on the IT and technology side of this situation, how
Mhm.
IT and new technologies can actually play a role in making that engagement stronger in this remote standpoint, because I'm sure that as you've mentioned, it's something that's been part of the challenge is making sure that people who thrive in an office environment can still do so when they're sitting at home alone. So I'd love, your take as an HR expert on, how technology can be a bolster to making sure that the federal workforce has everything in place to effectively keep employees engaged and meet mission demands.
Yes, the IT infrastructure is pivotal for allowing the interconnection among the workforce and people and their supervisors as well. And I think that there are really two components to this, the IT infrastructure, in terms of how it helps create engagement. One is actually just the tools and the functions themselves. So I would say that over the course of the last 9 months, our agency has seen a real improvement and increase in the amount of functionality that we have with the tools that are in place for us. So things have gotten easier, and we have more things that we can do with the platforms that we've adopted. We are also looking at other sort of increasing the portfolio of tools in the platform so that we can do things like large agency meetings where you've got thousands of people, or which would say take the place of an in-person town hall with lots of people, as an example. Because platforms are sometimes not good at the big ones, and other ones are. And so you sort of need a suite of these things so that you can address different needs. And we're not all the way there yet, but we're getting on towards a better future for all of the kinds of things that we use virtual tools for. The other piece, though, and I think this piece is just as important, is actually learning to use the tools to do things that you would otherwise do in person, like the virtual water coolers and the virtual whiteboards and just the habits, simple habits. So, I often hear people, say that they miss the being able to just walk down the hall and pop into somebody's office and have a conversation about something. And while it's true that whilst we're all in our individual locations, we can't literally walk down the hall and see each other, but just picking up the phone, the virtual phone, and calling them. These are all habits that we just have to start figuring out how to use in a way that feels satisfying, in addition to leveraging other features that maybe we haven't done before. So I don't know yet whether the virtual tools will 100% be sufficient, meaning be just as effective as everything that we could do. But I think that they've come a long way, even in the months that we've been out. And I feel like there's probably further that they will go. So we'll have more tools and they'll be better. They'll replicate the in person experience better over the course of time. And that will really help allow people to feel like they really are connecting and communicating with each other. So.
Great, thanks for that. I think we have time for one final question, and I think it's an important one. And it's how have workforce management and leadership, those important uh, skills that managers have to have, changed in this new environment, as their workforce is no longer in person in front of them.
It's a great question. And actually, like IT, I will say that the way that the tools that we give to our supervisors and managers can make the difference between success and not success in a virtual environment like this. So we have invested a lot in providing some support mechanisms for our supervisors and managers in this time. Now, some of that is oriented towards how you help people, like figure out how to cope with kids where their schools are closed, and concern about people in their friends and family groups getting COVID. So it's more of the crisis management in this particular era. But I think it has also taught our supervisors to do more of what they were already doing, but which was more of a kind of, you know, thing that they kind of did organically and they maybe didn't think about it, to be actually very deliberate about connecting with their people and asking their people how they are doing and providing forums, be it little group meetings or one on ones, to really do the check ins. And so this is all stuff that they have done in the past, but they may not even have realized they were doing because it was sort of happening real time and they weren't thinking about it. Now we're asking our supervisors and managers to really plan how they are going to connect with every individual on their team, plan how they're going to reach out to their peers, plan how they're going to ask questions of their leadership when they need some help. It's all of those things which are not new skills. They're just skills that have come to the fore as being really critical for supporting the workforce in this time. The last thing I'll say is that I think that the leadership of any organization, including ours, I mean, we have just the most amazing leaders, and they have come together to really have a unified voice on how we're going to manage in this crisis and what our priorities are, i.e., our priorities are workforce health and safety and engagement. And so they've been willing to really spend a lot of their time and energy and speaking in one voice. So obviously, that's a lot about crisis management and not necessarily about, say, the future of work on, if people are teleworking more. But I will say that generally, even post COVID, the idea that senior leadership are endorsing that this is a way that we're going to live and work, um, in an organization matters a lot to helping people kind of get past some of those initial barriers and really feel comfortable with and take advantage of a lot of the goodness that comes with, not being tied to an office structure and a commute and all the things that go along with
Yeah.
that. So
Absolutely. Well, you've brought a lot of insight today to this audience, so I tremendously appreciate that. And I definitely am keeping an eye on what the future of work in the federal government looks like, and I'll definitely keep an eye on what you're doing at NASA. But for now, I appreciate everything you've brought today. Jane, Datta, thank you so much.
great pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.